Hello, my brothers and sisters. I am so excited for you for the Discovery Bible study you're going to do today from Exodus chapter 16 and the first 7 verses of chapter 17. But before you go into that Discovery Bible study, I want to share with you the context for what you're getting ready to read, because here's what's happened. The people of Israel has been in bondage for 400 years, right? So this generation has known nothing but bondage, but yet God has set them free and through miracles has delivered them out of slavery in Egypt. And then he's done other miracles on their way out. He saves their firstborn children as other children and firstborn among the people in that nation were dying. These folks had their firstborn saved. Then he had taken them through the Red Sea, and it had parted for them, and they had walked through on dry ground while the enemy that pursued them was overtaken by the water. They had seen miracles. In fact, they had come to some bitter water and complained that they couldn't drink it, and God had made it pure for them to drink. And then he had taken them to 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees, I believe it was. And he had just been so good and so faithful and shown himself so true to them. And yet I want you to see what happens in between the miracles that he had done then and the miracles he would do later, when they were in a place where they faced something that they felt like they lacked and they had need, and they were needing once again to trust in God. How did they respond? How did they respond at this point? Like, after God had made them a promise, I'm bringing you out of slavery and I'm bringing you into a promised land, a land flowing with milk and honey. Well, what did they do in between, though? In between the promise and the fulfillment. You're going to learn so much about how people respond in between God's promises and his fulfillment, and in between miracles when he's done something that showed his faithfulness. But the in between, before our next miracle and that next provision, where we're in a place of need to trust him, how do you respond in between? And so I want you to think about the context of the people of Israel as you go into this passage, but also think about your own life. Think about you. How do you respond in between God's promise and the fulfillment of that promise? How do you respond when you're in the time where you're once again in need? And even though God has been faithful in the past, and even though he has promises for your future, how do you respond in those times when you're in need, or you have questions, or you're needing to have to trust God in a moment, or when it looks like things are not going the way that you would have anticipated? How do you respond? So as you think about the context of your own life, and you think about the context of the people of Israel and where they were, you're going to learn so much in this Discovery Bible study of the book of Exodus, chapter 16, and the first 7 verses of chapter 17. As you go into this time, I want you to please, after a couple of people have read this passage and someone has shared it back in your own words, really dig in on it and allow the Holy Spirit to reveal things to you. As a participant in this today, expect that God's going to open your eyes and you're going to discover things about God, about us, that are going to help you to live so much better in that in-between time, in between God's promise and the fulfillment, in between miracles. How are you going to be responding to God? You're going to grow so much through this Discovery Bible study. So go in and answer these questions about what you're learning. Ask questions of each other. Dig in, discover. It's going to be so beautiful. But then come back, because I'd like to say a few words for you before you go into that most important time when we make a commitment of how we're going to live out what God has shown us today. So God bless you as you go into your Discovery Bible study of Exodus chapter 16 and the first 7 verses of chapter 17. Welcome back, my brothers and sisters. I pray that you have so dug up so much, that the Holy Spirit has revealed to you, and you have discovered so much about us as people, about God and who He is. And there's so many observations that I will not have a chance to share that I'm sure you have already shared with each other. I just want to say what really stands out to me is that human tendency when God is taking us out of bondage and slavery. I mean, the slavery we had in our sin and our past, and He's taken us into the promised land, into the preferred future that He has for us, ultimately into paradise with Him. That we as human beings can actually look back and long for the slavery we were in. Imagine the misery of the people of Israel under their taskmasters, and yet they're going like, all they can remember is we sat around pots of meat. They're wanting to go back to Egypt. That human tendency to long for something that is so painful and so bad, forget the pain of our misery and actually desire to turn back away from the beautiful things that God has for us. And that's what we as human beings do when we go through struggles. That's usually not a big problem for me, but I tell you one that is. And that's this, is that so often as I find myself, God's done miracle after miracle after miracle of provision, and He's shown Himself so faithful. But that as I'm going into a situation where I'm facing similar challenges to what I experienced in the past, is to forget how faithful He is, and in that moment to wrestle as the people of Israel did with complaining or grumbling or doubting. Oh God, please forgive me for that, right? And so if you've ever experienced that, if you've ever been in a place where you're like, God, I so easily forget all that You've done in my past, and by God's grace, I want to not forget. I want to remember and trust in You and rely on Your faithfulness and walk in that assurance when I'm facing new times, when I need God to do what only God can do. That's what I want to do, God. By Your grace, I want to remember and I want to trust You. And one more for me, and I don't know if this is true for you, but it was ironic that the people of Israel would be here moving toward the promised land. That's what this was all about. It was moving out of slavery toward the promised land. And yet they had no thoughts of the promised land. It's so easy for us to be thinking about our current circumstances or about past things instead of recognizing that keeping our focus on what He has called us to is so important when you're facing those challenges and those struggles. So that's one more for me, is I, by God's grace, want to keep my focus on what He has promised, what He has called me to, so that I don't get caught up in the moments of discouragement or the moments of struggle or challenge in that journey between when He's made His promise and that promise is fulfilled. I want to keep my eyes on that. Well, how about you? What is it that you want to do by God's grace to live what He has shown you today? Share that with each other, and then pray for each other and encourage each other to actually live what we've learned today. God bless you as you share your by God's grace, I will with each other.